The front door was unlocked. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I stood on the porch of my childhood home, holding a box of fresh pastries and a smile. I'd been practicing in the car mirror for the last 20 minutes. It was supposed to be a perfect surprise. My parents had no idea I was coming. I'd driven 6 hours straight from Berlin, where I'd been on a work trip, just to see their faces light up. I pictured my mom clapping, her hands, and my dad pretending to be annoyed before pulling me into one of his bear hugs. I pushed the door open and called out, "Mom? Dad, surprise!" My voice echoed back at me, too loud in the silence. No answer. The house smelled strange, sweet, almost like burnt almonds. I frowned and stepped inside, the pastries still warm in my hands. The hallway was dim, the curtains drawn. Their shoes were by the door, my mom's purse on the table. They were home. I called again, louder this time. "Mom, Dad?" "It's me." Nothing. I walked through the living room, empty. The TV was off. The kitchen empty. A pot of tea sat on the stove, still warm. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart starting to race. The hallway upstairs was dark. I pushed open their bedroom door, and then I screamed. They were on the floor, side by side, perfectly still. My mom's face was pale, her lips slightly blue. My dad's hand was stretched toward her, as if he'd tried to reach her before he fell. I dropped the pastries. The box hit the floor and burst open, cream splattering across the carpet. I didn't care. I couldn't move. I dropped to my knees between them, my hands shaking as I touched their faces. Cold, too cold. But their chests were moving, just barely. They were breathing. I fumbled for my phone and called 911, my voice breaking as I tried to explain. "They're unconscious, please hurry, my parents, they're not waking up." The operator asked questions I couldn't answer. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know anything. The next minutes were a blur, sirens, red and blue lights, paramedics rushing in, neighbors standing outside, whispering. I followed the ambulance in my car, tears streaming down my face, the smell of burnt almonds still in my nose. At the hospital, doctors moved fast, IVs, monitors, tests. I sat in the waiting room, clutching my mom's purse like it could keep me anchored. A nurse brought me water I didn't drink. My husband, Alex, arrived an hour later, his face pale. He wrapped his arms around me and held me while I cried into his shirt. Hours passed. Then a doctor came out, his expression grim. He sat down across from us. "We've stabilized them," he said. "But there's something you need to know." I gripped Alex's hand so hard my knuckles went white. "They've been poisoned." The word hit me like a punch. Poisoned. My parents. The people who never hurt anyone. Who baked cookies for the neighbors. Who left their door unlocked because they trusted the world. The doctor continued. "It's a rare toxin. Colorless, odorless in small doses. But the amount in their blood is deliberate. Someone did this on purpose." I couldn't breathe. Alex pulled me close as the room spun. The police arrived shortly after. They asked questions I couldn't answer. Did my parents have enemies? Any strange visitors? Any threats? I shook my head over and over. No, no, no. They searched the house, found the teapot, the cups, the almond-scented cleaner under the sink. Everything pointed to an accident, until the lab results came back. Not an accident. Someone had mixed the poison into their tea. I spent the next week living at the hospital. My parents remained unconscious, their bodies fighting the toxin. I held their hands. I read them old letters. I whispered apologies for every time I'd been too busy to call. I begged them to wake up. Every night I went back to their house, searching for answers. I opened every cupboard, every drawer, every jar. I found nothing. No fingerprints. No signs of a break-in. Just that faint almond smell that wouldn't go away. The police were stumped. The neighbors were terrified. And I was falling apart. Alex tried to keep me grounded. He made me eat. He held me when I cried. He promised we'd find out who did this. Then, on the 7th day, everything changed. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe the channel, and also, tell me in the comments from where you watched this video. Now come back to the story. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cold cup of coffee when Alex walked in. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He sat down across from me and slid a small notebook across the table. "I found this," he whispered. In the attic, hidden behind a loose floorboard. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was my mother's handwriting. Page after page of dates, times, names. A diary she'd never told anyone about. And at the top of the last page, written in red ink, "If anything happens to us, check the basement freezer." The truth is there. My blood ran cold. We drove to the house in silence. The police had already searched the basement. They'd found nothing. But they hadn't looked inside the old chest freezer in the corner, the one my parents never used. Alex lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a single envelope. And a small glass vial, empty, with a label in my mother's handwriting. "Poison, for the day they come back." My knees buckled. Alex caught me as I stared at the vial, my mind racing. They knew. They knew someone was coming for them. And they'd prepared. But who? And why? The envelope felt heavier than it should have. My hands shook as I peeled it open, Alex's breath warm on my shoulder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, the edges worn from being handled over and over. My mother's handwriting filled the page, neat and careful, but the words themselves were frantic, almost desperate. "If you are reading this, it means something has happened to us. Please, don't trust anyone until you know the truth. There are things we never told you, things we thought we could protect you from." But now I'm not sure we were right. I read the words aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex squeezed my hand, his eyes wide. The rest of the letter was a list. Names, dates, places. Some I recognized, old family friends, neighbors, even a few distant relatives. Others meant nothing to me. At the bottom, in shaky letters, my mother had written, "If anything happens, start with the garden." The garden, my mother's pride and joy. She spent hours there every week, tending to her roses, her herbs, her little patch of tomatoes. I remembered her kneeling in the dirt, humming to herself, her hands always stained with earth. I'd never thought of it as anything but a hobby. We left the freezer as it was and hurried outside, the night air sharp and cold. The garden looked peaceful, untouched. But as I walked the narrow path between the flower beds, I noticed something odd. A patch of earth near the back fence, freshly turned, the soil darker than the rest. I knelt down and dug with my hands, the dirt cold and wet under my nails. A few inches down, my fingers hit something hard. I pulled out a small metal box, rusted at the corners, locked with a simple latch. Alex found a rock and smashed it open. Inside were more papers, old letters, receipts, photographs. And at the very bottom, a faded photograph of my parents, much younger, standing with a man I didn't recognize. On the back, in my father's handwriting, "The day we made the deal." My heart pounded. I flipped through the papers, searching for answers. There were bank statements all from years ago, showing large deposits and withdrawals, letters from a law firm I'd never heard of, and a single unsigned note. "If you break the silence, you know what happens." Alex and I sat on the grass, piecing together the story. My parents had been involved in something dangerous, something they'd kept hidden for decades. The poison, the diary, the warning in the freezer, it all pointed to one thing. Someone wanted them gone. But who? And why now? We took everything to the police. The detective in charge, a woman named Harris, listened carefully as we explained what we'd found. She took the papers, the vial, the photograph, and promised to look into it. But her eyes were wary, her questions careful. I could tell she was holding something back. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept replaying the last week in my mind. The phone call, the hospital, the poison, the freezer, the garden. I tried to remember if my parents had ever mentioned anything strange, any hint of danger, but all I could remember were the ordinary moments. My mother's laughter, my father's stories, the way they always made me feel safe. The next morning, Detective Harris called. "We found something," she said. "You need to come to the station." Alex and I drove in silence, the city blurring past the windows. At the station, Harris led us to a small room and spread the papers out on the table. She pointed to the bank statements. "These accounts were flagged years ago in a money laundering investigation. Your parents' names came up, but the case was dropped. No evidence, no charges." I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. "My parents weren't criminals," I said. "They were teachers. They barely had enough to pay the mortgage." Harris nodded. "That's what makes this so strange. The money came and went in a matter of months. Then nothing for years. Until last week, she slid a new statement across the table. A deposit, large, recent, from an offshore account. "Someone paid your parents," Harris said. And then someone tried to silence them. My head spun. But why? What did they know? Harris shook her head. "We're still looking. But there's more." She handed me the photograph, the one of my parents with the stranger. We ran facial recognition. His name is Viktor Sokolov. He's been linked to several criminal organizations in Europe. He disappeared 20 years ago. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. My parents smiling, arms around a man who was now a ghost. Harris leaned forward. "We think your parents witnessed something. Maybe they were forced to help. Maybe they tried to back out. Whatever it was, it caught up with them." I felt sick. Everything I thought I knew about my family was unraveling. Alex put his arm around me. "What do we do now?" Harris's eyes were kind but firm. "Go home. Stay safe. If you remember anything at all, call me." We left the station in a daze. The world felt different, colder, like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I tried to call my parents' friends, but no one answered. The neighbors avoided my eyes. Even the family dog staying with a neighbor seemed nervous when I came to visit. That night, I sat in my parents' living room surrounded by memories. Photographs on the walls, souvenirs from family vacations, the old clock ticking in the hallway. I tried to picture my parents as criminals, as people who could be involved in something dangerous. It didn't fit. But the evidence was there, staring me in the face. Alex made tea, his hands steady even as mine shook. "We'll get through this," he said. "We'll find the truth." I nodded, but inside I wasn't sure. The truth felt like a moving target, always just out of reach. Then just after midnight, my phone buzzed. A text, no name, no number. Just 3 words. "You're next, stop." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Alex read the message over my shoulder. "We need to go to the police." But I shook my head. "Not yet. There's something I need to do first." Because suddenly I remembered something my mother once told me, years ago when I was just a child. "If you ever feel lost, look for the blue book." The blue book. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, and tore through the shelves in my father's study. There, hidden behind a row of dusty encyclopedias, was a small leather-bound journal. Blue. I opened it, and what I found inside made my body tremble. The blue book was heavier than it looked, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. I sat on the floor, Alex beside me, and flipped through the first pages. My father's handwriting filled every line, dates, names, cryptic notes, and sketches of places I half remembered from childhood. But as I turned the pages, the entries grew darker, more frantic. One entry, dated nearly 20 years ago, caught my eye. Victor came again. He says we owe him. I told him we're out, but he laughed. Said we'd never be out. Anna is scared. I promised her we'd keep Emily safe. My breath caught. Anna, my mother. Emily, me? I kept reading, my hands trembling. The next pages told a story I never imagined. My parents had been caught up in something years before. I was born, a scheme that started small. A favor for a friend, but grew into something dangerous. They'd tried to walk away, but Victor wouldn't let them. The money in the bank statements was hush money, paid to keep them silent. When they refused to help anymore, the threats started. My parents had lived in fear for years, always looking over their shoulders, always waiting for the past to catch up. The last entry was written just days before I found them. We saw Victor's car outside the house. Anna wants to run, but I told her we can't, not anymore. If anything happens to us, Emily must know the truth. She must be careful. Trust no one. I closed the book, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Alex put his arm around me, his face pale. "We have to show this to the police," he whispered. But I shook my head. "Not yet. There's something else." I remembered the vial in the freezer, the label in my mother's handwriting, poison. For the day they come back. My parents hadn't been poisoned by a stranger. They'd poisoned themselves, deliberately, to avoid being forced to help Victor again. It was a desperate act, a last stand against a man who'd haunted them for decades. I sat in the silence, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. My parents had sacrificed everything to protect me. They'd lived in fear, kept secrets, and in the end, chosen to risk their own lives rather than let Victor use them again. I called Detective Harris and told her everything. She listened in silence, then promised to send officers to watch the house. "You're not alone," she said. "We'll keep you safe." The next days passed in a blur. My parents remained unconscious, but the doctors said they were stable. The police launched a full investigation, tracking Victor's movements, digging into old records, piecing together the story my parents had tried so hard to hide. One evening, as I sat by my mother's hospital bed, her fingers twitched. I leaned in, hope rising in my chest. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked at me as if from a great distance. Then she squeezed my hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We tried to protect you." I hugged her, sobbing. "You did. You always did." My father woke a day later, confused but alive. The relief was overwhelming. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps, sharing the pain and the fear and, finally, the hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. The police found Victor 2 days later, trying to cross the border. He was arrested, and with the evidence from the Blue Book, the letters and the bank records, he was finally charged for crimes that had haunted my family for decades. The truth broke me, but it also set me free. My parents had lived with secrets, but they'd never stopped loving me, never stopped fighting for our family. In the end, their courage saved us all. If you've watched this far, thank you for staying with me through this story. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you ever find yourself facing shadows from the past, remember, sometimes the truth is the only way forward, no matter how much it hurts. That night, as I sat in my childhood home, the air finally clear, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The past was behind us. The future, whatever it held, was ours to write.